part of our hypothesis, our instinct, based on seeing so many great futures projects fail, is that what if people felt it more? I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience also showing that we need to have an emotional connection to the things we're deciding in order to actually make a decision. So what if we brought feeling, emotion, experience into the mix, all of those things into the mix as we try to think about the future and feel the future?
Hi and welcome to the Futures Workshop, a series of conversations with the world's leading futurists about the tools they've created. It's hosted by Victoria Mulligan, a futures thinker from Auckland in New Zealand. Hello.
Kia ora, hello.
Who are you talking to today?
Today's guest is someone who's had a really enormous impact on how I think about and approach the future as something that we can design into and shape. Jake Dunagan is a real pioneer in experiential futures and social foresight. In fact, he is one of the originators of experiential futures and has been leading the charge in this field for the last 2 decades. I first met Jake when I was studying design futures at the Institute for the Future, where he also leads the Governance Futures Lab. He's reimagining and experimenting with the foundations of how we govern ourselves. And what struck me then, and still does today, is how Jake designs futures that are both super creative, innovative, but also deeply human.
And like a lot of the futures thinkers you've spoken to on this podcast, he's worked all around the world.
Yeah, his work is super diverse and super impactful. He has crafted immersive scenarios for Hawaii's 2050 Sustainability Task Force. He's developed tech and ethics toolkits for the UNDP and envisioned future cities with the US Conference of Mayors. He is a dedicated educator, works out of the University of Texas and California College of the Arts, as well as Centro in Mexico. And what I admire most about Jake is his commitment to making the future both accessible and actionable.
What are we talking about with him today?
So he's interested in possible futures for sure, but equally, if not more so, he's interested in how we can shape what's possible. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking to Jake about his approach to experiential futures. We'll explore how we can imagine the future as well as actively create it. His insights are practical, his ideas are powerful, and his enthusiasm for this field is contagious. I am excited to share this fun conversation with someone who's been both a mentor and an inspiration to me, and I am confident you will find his perspective as valuable as I do.
Great, let's get into it then. Victoria's conversation with Jake Dunagan.
Welcome to the Futures Workshop. Hello, Jake. Kia ora.
Hi, Victoria. How are you?
Really good. Really pleased to have you on with us today. Let's get started. Can you tell me a little bit about the tool that we're going to talk about today?
Yes. This is a tool called Create a Scene, which in my sort of wordplay pun life makes me very happy to name a tool this. But it has a real meaning. It has a specific a root of why we call it that. And it really is a stage in experiential futures, or design futures, creating artifacts and experiences from the future. It's a stage in that process that is a critical moment where we move, and I'll talk a little bit more about the context of how we get there, but it's really the moment where we move from an abstract possible world to start thinking about representing a scene, a moment, a time in place from a future world. So it's a really critical, important, fun, hard sometimes shift, bridge, leap to take a world and put it into something that actually begins to be seen, felt, heard, to bring it into being, as it were.
Cool. I love that. I also particularly really like the name. I'm with you on the cool punny name. Hey, can you tell me whereabouts does this tool fit in the foresight process?
Yeah. So this will be for experiential futures, not necessarily all of foresight, but this is part of what we call experiential futures, which is broadly trying to, as I've already hinted at, create an interface, a connection, a relationship, an emotional reaction to possible futures, to take it from, oh, this could happen abstractly, into saying, oh, wow, that just happened in front of me. and to simulate possible worlds so that we can make them thinkable and feelable. Experiential futures. We broke this down. There's a longer backstory, but Stuart Candy and I were doing a 3-day event at Arizona State about 12 years ago, and we had to take 50 people who'd never had any futures or experiential design futures before, and get them up to speed, create something, execute it, and present it within a weekend. And so we broke down the design process that Stuart and I had been doing at that point for 5-6 years. And I always joke we had developed a kind of twin language that nobody else understood. We could use references. We could say, oh yeah, this or that, and we knew what we meant, but nobody else did. So we had this group, and we're like, how can we get across what we do without spending 3 of the 3 days just having them learn our language? And so we created this. Really, Stuart led this, and we wrote about it later in an article that developed it in more detail. But it really is breaking down the process into 4 different stages to go from like the most abstract to the most concrete, and actually create and design and execute something. So there's 4 stages. It begins with subject. So what do you want to look at? What is the thing that you're studying? It's the future of New Zealand. It's the future of oceans. It's the future of paper clips. Whatever it is, you need a subject. And so what are you looking at? And, all of futures is really trying to understand the trends, emerging issues, the things that are happening in that subject matter. So there's the whole, as it's going on, each one of these steps has 1,000 different theories and concepts and processes tied to them. But so I'm simplifying this, hopefully for a good reason, and you'll see. So what is the subject? What's going on? And then we break that down, which we often do in futures, is to tell a story, or multiple stories, preferably, scenarios. So what out of the possible futures of paper clips, what are some of the different trajectories that we could logically trace? And we use alternative futures, we use 2x2s, we use all kinds of different methods to develop scenarios, stories. So subject matter, you have an understanding of what's going on in this world. You've created a set of stories or scenarios out of that. And then the next step down, this is where this tool comes in, is creating a situation or a scene. I like to call it a scene, a moment in time, a place, something that takes that scenario and says, okay, yeah, I see the broad contours. You've told me a story, you've done world building, but what is it like to wash your clothes in this world? What is it like to have dinner? What is it like to have, a rite of passage ceremony? It's a moment that coalesces a lot of the meaning, a lot of the story, a lot of the worldviews, the dynamics, the lived experience of people in that world into something that is a one-to-one representation of a moment in that world. And so that's where the scene comes in. And then finally, with the last stage we call stuff, which is the creation of the stuff. So if I'm doing a graduation ceremony, I need whatever the version of cap and gowns are, or the diploma, or a pomp and circumstance from 2050, whatever that ends up being. So all of those things are actually the stuff. That's the fun part. That's what we always look at and talk about, the artifacts from the future, but it's nested within a scene that is nested within a scenario, which is nested in the work that you did to understand the subject matter broadly. So we call that the experiential threshold, where from scenario to scene is kind of what we call the experiential threshold. This is where you're moving into a much more tangible, experienceable, if that's a word, moment that this tool is where we try to leverage to help people, to give some scaffolding to actually do that, because it is a creative leap. And so we're trying to balance the process of doing that without being overly formulaic. And I'll talk a lot about that, because this is something I think quite a bit about, is how do you give enough structure for creation without dictating. And I always say, we don't want to paint by numbers. It's not a formula. You're not just turning a crank. There is creativity here. So finding that balance was something that we really thought deeply about when we created this tool.
That's very cool. I love hearing you talk about that.
Can I just jump in there too, Jake? For the layperson, you talked about alternative futures and 2x2 there. I'm sure Victoria knew what you were talking about, but for people who don't, can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm not just talking to myself here, right? So you're right. Um, uh, we need to parse possibility space and futures. As you go on in time, the number of possibilities nears infinite. The number of things that can happen, decisions, events, so we sometimes call that the cone of possibility. So as you go out into the future, the cone gets wider and wider and wider and wider. And so if you want to find a place that's somewhere between, I'm going to predict a single future, I know the one thing that's going to happen, and nearing infinite number of other possibilities, how do you break that down into something that's thinkable and useful, that doesn't oversimplify but also doesn't overwhelm you with possibilities? And so a couple of methods that are probably the most popular methods. One is alternative futures. It was created by Jim Dator. He's looking at archetypes of change. What are the generic shapes of change that any future could fall into? And he found, maybe it's based in time and space. There may be other models of this, but he found basically any image of the future would fall into one of 4 different archetypes. And that is a growth future. So continuation, things keep growing. And that's, I have to say, it's kind of the capitalistic or maybe in 20th century model that we're gonna keep growing forever and ever. And so that's an archetype, and you hear it all the time. Almost every business, government leader wants growth in some form. The next one, as I think we're coming to grips with the fact that growth forever and ever may not be possible, and that it could lead to ecological collapse, environmental destruction, economic inequalities might lead to a collapse. So the second archetype is collapse. And then, so I think we know that one fairly well. The third one we call discipline or constraint. So we can't grow forever. We don't want to collapse. We want to hold on. So we try to balance things. Sustainability, mindset falls into this, trying to hold on to things and be more balanced. And then the last one is called transformation. So a radical paradigm shift between the past and the future. So one of our favorite examples is germ theory in medicine. So before that, it would be almost unthinkable to think these little tiny unseen creatures are doing harm. After that, it's so obvious it is. You change your whole hygienic practices, surgery looks different, you have clean rooms, so it transforms medicine. So that archetype of transformation is another one that we have. So you take those 4 archetypes, and then you can parse possibility space by saying, I'm going to take the data I have and see what's pointing toward growth future. What could lead us to a collapse future, and how could I tell that story that makes sense? What are disciplined futures or constrained futures? What do they look like? And then transformation. So it gives you guidance to parse that wide, expanding range of possibility, the cone that expands out and out, so that you can see different parts of that. So you feel like you've got coverage, but you're not overwhelmed with that. And so alternative futures is what I learned at the University of Hawaii with Jim Dator. The other one I'm not going to go into as long a detail. It's called 2x2. Yeah. It was developed at the Global Business Network. It looks at 2 critical uncertainties, and you map them over on an axis to each other. So things are growing or things are declining. Technology is progressing or is declining. So you end up with 4 quadrants that reflect the logic of the parameters that you put in, and then you kind of similarly scope out the scenario. So the scenario process, so you do whatever process you want, or and there are dozens of other ways to generate scenarios, but you're left with a set of stories. And then, again, just to repeat, so you've got, say, four different possible futures. You can take all of them, but you really, for our process, you do them one by one. Okay, in a transformation future, let me create a scene. So from the point of view of 1850, if I'm creating a scene from 1950, it's a surgical room and it looks really different. I've created a scene where the germ theory, the transformed practice of medicine, what it looks like in the future. I'm doing this historically, obviously, as an example, but that's what we're trying to do for the future. So if there has been, a massive growth, economic growth, what does that future look like? How can I represent it? What might the transformation of the future look like? How can I represent it? And again, that's the threshold that we're crossing when we use the create a scene to go from scenario to situation or scene.
Thank you.
That's really helpful. We'll make sure we put those tools in the show notes as well. Can I just ask you for a quick second? Why do we need to create a scene? What does it help us with? What's the point?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, right. We should want to know the point. So part of the point is tied to futures in general and foresight. How can we look ahead more effectively? How can we steer change toward the kind of future we want? How can we reduce the number of times we're wrong? As Stuart and I have written and we love to say, it's better to be surprised by a simulation rather than blindsided by reality. So we're trying to get a little bit ahead of some of the negative consequences, and it's not always avoiding threats. Try to steer toward better futures. So it's really to lead us to make better decisions that hopefully lead to better futures. The reason we want to create a scene and the reason we do experiential futures is, there's a lot of science and a lot of psychology and honestly anecdotes and personal experience that shows that we're really not great at thinking about the future. We do it all the time. It's part of what we are as human beings, but we go wrong. We have a lot of biases. We over emphasize continuities, and we love linear extrapolations. We tend to focus on a kind of official view of the future and not be critical about it. All of our incentive structures tend to be geared towards short-term returns. So there's a whole host of reasons why our brains work in a certain way that kind of limits us in our imagination sometimes without a little bit of help. So we're really trying to help our brains, our groups, our organizations, and our society think about the future more effectively. To do that with written scenarios and great research and white papers is one thing. I think we're pretty clear that it doesn't do the job in all cases and is kind of limited and doesn't really move the needle very much. So part of our hypothesis, our instinct based on seeing so many great futures projects fail, is that what if people felt it more? I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience also showing that we need to have an emotional connection to the things we're deciding in order to actually make a decision. So what if we brought feeling, emotion, experience into the mix, all of those things into the mix as we try to think about the future and feel the future? And so experiential futures is really an attempt to make us care more, to make us feel more, to make us understand more too. I mean, there's a case that, things aren't really understandable just cognitively. We need to feel it in our embodied minds, in our extended minds, what this might be like. And so all of the host of design and experiences and video and artifacts are all in service of really trying to shrink that gap between the lived experience of today and possible futures of tomorrow. And hopefully shrinking that gap makes us more effective. That's I won't even call it a theory. That's a hypothesis we're working on.
Is the suggestion, just so I'm super clear, is the suggestion that if you have a scene and it's more specific, you're more likely to feel that? Does specificity help with feeling?
Yeah, I want to make sure I get this, not incorrect. I think it does help with feeling. It helps for sure that in the psychologists, that have studied this, it really helps us connect more with that future. There's a host of research. My colleague Jane McGonigal turned me on to it around what our brain waves look like when we think about ourselves in the future. And when we think about ourselves in the future, if you look at the pattern of brain waves, it looks like the same pattern as we're thinking about a stranger.
Wow.
In the present and a stranger in the future. So our future self feels like a stranger. And this research it came out of a financial research trying to understand why people don't save for the future. And they don't save for the future. One explanation might be is because we don't feel like ourselves. Our future selves, when we imagine it, feels like a stranger. So I'm not going to give money away. It feels like we're giving it away to a stranger. So part of overcoming that bias or limitation about feeling connected to the future as ourselves is that specificity injection, as you say. All right, I am going to be X years old in 2034. I might look like I might try to really understand. There's apps that do this too. Maybe I've got more wrinkles and gray hair. My kids are a certain amount of age. I'm going to be wearing this. I live in Austin, Texas. It's probably going to be hotter. What does it look like outside? And it's to really paint a vivid picture of myself living in that world. And the studies have shown that wave begins to change. It begins to look a little more like you're thinking about yourself. So if we extrapolate that a little more broadly, again, with all the caveats about taking one piece of science and expanding it, but if you think about specificity injection broadly, I think it closes the gap and makes you feel like you're more connected to the future. And again, all of that payoff is supposed to change behavior. Would you do something in this, in that example case? Would you save money if you felt like your future self is you? Would you protect future generations a little bit more vigorously if you felt like they were real people that you have a connection to? And so we can think about 7 generations and 3 generations ahead and behind. That helps. I think that makes it concrete. But getting really specific about the world we're going to live in, what is it going to look like? What is it going to feel like? What is the color of the sky? Do we have automobiles? Getting very concrete, specific about that closes that gap and begins to make us connect more deeply with the future.
This is wonderful. Love it. Can you talk me through how we do this then? So what do I do to create the scene?
Yeah. So again, I began by talking about a little bit hinting at the challenge, which is how do you take something? Okay, I've got a collapse scenario. You could turn that into a million different ways, and we have a movie a week, an HBO series a week about different collapses. But how do you get concrete about that? How do you take it? How do you take? Oh yeah, the world's going to collapse. Oh, we're going to have a pandemic, and put that into something specific. And so we are trying to provide a little bit of help, a little bit of structure for doing that. And so we try to lead you through. Again, we're kind of modeling a process that we learned really through trial and error. So, we give you prompts basically to what do you need to think about first. And so what we begin with is just a little bit of making sure that you understand the scenario and trying to draw out some of the core pieces that are underlying that scenario. And you could, there are lots of ways to do this. You could really, you could do an analysis of that, but we just have a few prompts. So we're also trying to balance complexity and simplicity, and honestly, to put it on a single plane of a worksheet. So we ask people to think about the values that are driving this future. Okay, in a collapse future, if it's post collapse, the values might be more around survival and security than they are about creativity and prosperity or something like that. Trust, would be really important. So you really just interrogate, like, what are the main values that are driving this world? What is kind of the worldview, the mentality of people that are in this world? So we ask you to name several values. Another prompt that we have is to ask for people to think about, and this kind of honestly is influenced a little bit by Sohail and Ayatollah and causal layer analysis, is to think about myths and metaphors that might be underlying this future. So if it's collapse, is there a myth and metaphor about the phoenix rising from the ashes? Is that something that's in play? Is it, and we try not to lean too much into science fiction tropes or whatever, but obviously people are going to go to Mad Max, the world's Mad Max, and after the collapse. So if that image is relevant for you and from the scenario, that's fine. So this is where you're bringing in analogies, metaphors, myths that are all going to be later in service of creativity, but you want to name those kind of things. So metaphors, value set, what's going on, metaphors are there. Over time, I'm not going to go too much in this. The tool has evolved. At one point, we asked people, what are the differences between today and that world? just so you can begin to see, to play off of this. It's one to deepen your understanding of the world. Again, it's another one because you're, as a creative thinker, you're trying to do justice to this future, but you're also having to remember your audience and where they're coming from, and are there little shortcuts that you can use to get people into that world a little bit more effectively without going too much into tropes and cliches. Okay, so that's kind of setting you up by deepening your understanding of the world, or naming that at least explicitly. And then this is the part that I think is a real creative addition to that I had not seen anywhere else, and maybe there are in other creative industries. But we ask people to think about two different ways to approach creating a scene in this world. One is around special moments, and you heard me start to name off some things before, like a graduation ceremony, or a wedding ceremony, or a kid's first birthday, or an election party. Are there moments in this world that carry meaning? A holiday. There are things that already have baked in symbols and meaning that become a great window into that world. And so special moments, rites of passages, there are places and times where people condense a lot of their worldview into that moment. Okay, it's a bar mitzvah. Okay, well, Jewish faith and that moment and becoming a man, and there's symbols, and there's so it has meaning in it, and there's also a lexicon that's tied to that too that you can play with creatively. So we ask people just to brainstorm some special moments. What would be relevant in that world? And then we ask them, kind of on the flip side of the coin, to think about everyday activities. And again, I named some of them, like going to dinner, or washing your clothes, or brushing your teeth, or driving to school, something that you do all the time, which is another way of getting at differences between now and then. Oh, well, driving to school in 2020 was getting in a gas-powered car and taking my kid physically to school. Driving to school in this transformed future of 2050 is, that's just transformation. Their consciousness is loaded into an avatar in their virtual worlds, and they move in that space. That's what driving to school is.
Yeah, wow.
For example, so it gives you, again, you're not just trying to represent a world, you're really trying to create bridges, cognitive bridges, emotional bridges to the future. And so using tried and true structures, events, words, lexicons, moments, and both special moments and everyday moments are great ways to show differences, because that's what you're really trying to do. Oh, okay. Those are the same wedding vows, but you're marrying a robot. Okay, this is this is a wedding. It's something I'm familiar with, but now there's something different about it. And so you're kind of highlighting that difference in order again, as a window into understanding that bigger world. This is not what the work is. The work is not having this experience or looking at this artifact. You're really trying to always go back to that scenario and say, can I understand it in a deeper way? What would I do in this future? What would it be like to live in that future? And then, if I'm working with a company, what are the strategic choices? If I'm working with government, like what are the policy responses we might want to do? So it's really all, again, sort of working yourself back up as you go through this process is to really get back into understanding that world. This is just an invitation to do that.
Do you find this hard to facilitate? Is this challenging for people to be able to make that bridge?
Yes, and it is in general. It is by reading a scenario, but we do it all the time with fiction and everything. But it is also through an experience, because we are trying to pluck emotional strings. That's the point, and so you're getting a whole person in many cases. So, okay, you're going, you're having this experience where you're cast as a refugee getting off a boat in Hawaii in 2050 and being inducted into a kind of fascistic military dictatorship. Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, I'm understanding this is a different world, but also I have feelings about that, and we try to navigate as best we can the benefits of that kind of emotional connection and provocation without over um, bringing too much into it, or having people reject it, because I'd like to say our enemy is dismissal, and dismissal can happen if people don't care, and it's easy for them to ignore, or they don't get it or whatever. Dismissal is also part if you've overplayed, or if you've hit the wrong note, or if you don't understand, like not doing the research, not knowing, understanding cultural context, you know um, being offensive uh, without thoughtfulness to how that is going to play out, being insensitive, that can lead to dismissal as well. And so we're trying to find that balance between, we want you to feel something different. This is not, a space of pure comfort, and even though some of this is creative and playful, it's not really just meant to be trivialized fun. It's meant to make you think about things differently. And sometimes that means challenging people's assumptions about the future. Sometimes that means giving them back their assumptions in ways that they never thought it would go. And so we're always, trying to balance that sense of provocation, and make you care and respond with with energy to a situation, uh, and then or pushing you away. So if we don't draw you in close enough, we haven't done our job. If we push you away, we haven't done our job either. So it can be difficult in that sense, just in the sort of psychology of that moment. I'm not even talking about designing artifacts or any of that kind of technical part, but just in the experience design part of it, and how you navigate an audience or participants through one of these experiences.
And I might be jumping ahead now, Jake, so pull me back if I am, but how do you get in there? So you talked about, sometimes the narrative or the written or the white paper ends up gathering dust on the shelf. So what are you doing? Are you sharing a scenario as a spoken word? Are you sharing it with visual or with imagery, or what's the process you go through to take from there?
Yeah, I mean, over the years we've managed to do so many different genres and modalities for doing this. The written word is great. I read novels, I read nonfiction, so that's fine. I just want to make sure that we're not saying this is better or replacing anything. I think it needs to be thought about as a complementary set of tools, an ecosystem of ways of getting to people and getting them to care. So yes, some of the examples I've kind of been talking about are lived experiences with actors. So you're coming into a room, and there's somebody talking to you, and there's flags up on the wall, and you're taking an oath, and you're being asked to do something in real life. So there is a like a almost theater live action role play kind of mode to it. Which again, it takes more time. There are subtleties to doing that, resources that are needed to do that, but that's a modality. Is basically a kind of lived role play theatrical experience with obviously with sets and artifacts and everything. There are films, short films, videos, things like that we would call part of what we do as well, and those are really effective. That's probably I would say the most common way now that I do design futures or experiential futures is through videos, and particularly what I do, short videos. Like take a scenario, let's see a scene, let's put it in, and create it. Very effective, shareable. It's 5 minutes. People they understand it in ways. I think that reading a longer paper may not draw them in so well. We do artifacts in the future, so we could have just like a postcard, or a set of postcards from different futures. So it could be kind of a standalone, and that sort of blends over into museum exhibitions, which I've done quite a bit over the years as well. So it could be, an exhibit at a museum or part of a larger exhibit, which is also a modality, which, has written pieces, it has artifacts, it has a story. All of these obviously have stories baked into it, but.
So are you literally talking about creating a museum exhibit that people go and wander around in, or are you giving them an artifact and saying, hey, this comes from a sort of a hypothetical museum or the science gallery of the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, these are actual museum exhibits in a museum. It could be like, so we had there was one at the Smithsonian in the U.S. It's its own museum. It's not all futures, but there was a futures exhibit. We did one in Madrid for the Telefonica Museum, which had a special exhibit geared around futures. There's also now, you probably know, the Museum of the Future in Dubai, which is itself created as a museum to house future artifacts, future exhibits that are set in 2070. In that case, so you come in and all of the exhibits and artifacts and pieces in the museum are set around the year 2070 as far as the narrative part of that museum. So yeah, I mean, exhibits, artifacts on a shelf that tell a story. That's one that we've used as well. We've done monumental art pieces on sides of mountains too, for example. So they're kind of anything's in play. Music, we often have musical accompaniment to what we do. Poetry. I guess the kind of elephant in the room is also generative AI now, which has just speed run through a lot of the things that we used to do with designers and draw out and take a while to do iterations. It's kind of my colleague Dylan Hendricks says, like speed running through reality. So you can run through a whole bunch of artifacts. So everyone, I'm not a creative like artist per se or designer, but I've worked with them. But in this case, with tools like that, with all the caveats, that people are recognizing, you can speed up, harness this tool to kind of make your imagination on warp speed and run through different possibilities. So it's a different ballgame than it was 5 years ago, even.
Amazing, and it'll continue to change, I imagine, continue to evolve. I'm gonna
daily, yeah, for sure.
It's cool, yeah. Hey, I'm gonna pull us back to the Create a Scene tool. So we've warmed up with the video or the poetry or the whatever we've got. Who does the scene? Who creates the scene? Who's running through the process and how?
Yeah, we didn't even finish. I'm gonna have to go back and just realizing that we didn't get to the scene yet.
It's because I got excited and
so
had more questions.
Pause on your answer. Go back now and finish. Yeah. Finish the tool. Okay, so you've imagined special moments. You've imagined everyday activities. The next part of it is we have a series of prompts that ask you. Basically, you just have to now decide. As I said, this is not a machine that you turn a crank and something comes out of. You have to just say, okay, yeah, the visit to the automatic teller machine to get your money out is what we're going to play out in this future. And it's not money, it's something else that you're getting or whatever. You have to begin to then think about what's the best idea, what's the most effective. And so all the criteria that we've kind of been talking about, who's your audience, how are you going to make it connect? And then getting very practical. This is something, I want to emphasize as well. At some point, you have to get real. How much money do you have? How much time do you have? How many people are going to help you? What can you pull off? And if you have this grandiose idea about, staging the Olympic Games from 2050, or whatever the number would be at that point, and you can't do it, it's just not possible, then that's not an idea that works. So what can you do? Okay, we can make an Olympic flag from Darfur, which is an artifact that actually exists. So you can find your level too between your creative ambition and the practicalities of making something happen. So we have a discussion segment for there, and then finally, just to close the loop on this, you just describe it, and you're kind of writing a treatment for it as if you would for a film or kind of a trailer for what you're talking about. So you name it, you describe it, and then another part of it that we have kind of excised off over the years, but it's still important to name, is who's doing what. So, I'm knitting the quilt for this thing that's going to be, part of this exhibit or part of this experience that we're creating. I'm making the soundscape that's going to be going on in the background. So you have to get very real, and who's doing what and what are the dates. And so I just want to make sure that's part of the discussion too, because you have to do the thing to make it happen. So, okay, so that's the general contour of the tool called Create a Scene. So your question was,
who knows, Jake?
Who's in there?
My question was, well, now my question is, it's going to continue to change. Now my question is, I get asked all the time, we can't do a monument on the side of a hill. So what's the most lo-fi version? Have you seen good, effective lo-fi scenes created that have had a real impact, and how did they get there?
Yes. Yes. So one of my favorite examples, just from my own work, was we did a project, lo-fi, low budge. Those things often come together, which was to work with the tourism management school at the University of Hawaii. And so we were running a workshop, or we were brought in to help them run a workshop on the future of tourism. Obviously, it's a big deal in Hawaii. And so, we didn't really have time or money to do something too extensive. So what we ended up doing was like, what if we created one artifact from 4 different possible futures in Hawaii? Okay, what if that artifact, let's do something very typical. What if we did a postcard from 4 different possible futures for the state of Hawaii and Hawaiian tourism? And so we worked with a designer artist, and we kind of just scoped out, all right, in a growth future, this postcard is probably like an advertisement for, maybe like a hotel casino, but it's underwater because sea level rise has happened. So, but they're playing it off as some sort of glamorous thing. So that's what a postcard is in this future, in that particular future. Another one was a collapse future, which was a postcard, which was basically an appeal to the UN Secretary General to help, because the U.S. had kind of abandoned Hawaii. There had been a series of hurricanes, and so it was like an appeal. We unfortunately have a lot of examples of places that would, be in dire straits. So the postcard itself was really like, just sending off, like, send help, please. The discipline one was really interesting to me because it was a postcard as an invitation that you could only come to Hawaii if you're invited by somebody who lives there, and those invitations are rationed, so you only have a few invitations per year. So control of tourism is much higher in that world, and you're coming. You have to do a health test. You have to be able to participate in society. You're not just coming to lounge on a chair and drink Mai Tais. You're actually, there's no money exchange, etc. So there were a lot of conditions to that. So the postcard itself was an invitation. And then the last one was like a transformation world where you really don't go to Hawaii. You only go in a virtual world. But this virtual version of Hawaii, all the IP was owned by this company. And so you could only visit, 1950s Elvis Blue Hawaii if you were a subscriber to this company, or you bought this game or experience. So those were fairly straightforward. I mean, there was a lot of design, but they were, I would call them lo-fi, and we had great response to that. People got it. They, this was already thinking in tourism terms. But then we leveraged those artifacts and we sent them around to almost 200 without any return address. And this was our kind of provocation mode. But we sent it around to community leaders, elected officials, business leaders, one a day with a different future. And then with finally on the last day with a link to a discussion group where we could have a longer, more open conversation about what they were seeing. So, you get in the mail, okay, I'm going to go to Maui Hatton, the casino. Oh, the next day it's like, oh, Hawaii's a disaster. The next day is an invitation, etc. And so that was, four pieces of cardboard printed, yes, but it didn't take much to have a really big effect. And so, we love the kind of, the back end of that was the kind of guerrilla style. So you can put something on the street, or you can, create a new flag or something. You can use, we were, very influenced by Adbusters and culture jamming and all that as well. And so you can kind of smuggle in a whole lot of meaning and provocation without having to, have a Hollywood budget.
All right, so finally, Jake, can you tell me a little bit about how you would facilitate this in terms of group size? So would you run through a creative scene with a big group, small group, or individually?
Yeah, you're going to get the favorite answer. It depends, of course. We started when we did it, and Stuart Candy, myself, via Jim Dater, and a whole host of other collaborators. there were 600 people in that event, the kickoff for Hawaii 2050 sustainability plan. So this was kind of our first go at this, and we had no idea, where to stop ourselves. So we just like created all these different things. So we basically broke people into groups of 150. They got to experience 2 of the futures. So it can, you can probably go even more than that in some cases if it's kind of a theatrical presentation, or like say like a State of the Union address to a lot of people, or a lecture at a college. You could probably get more people into it. And then it could be a handful of people, and it could be not all at once too. Like in museum exhibitions, people are coming and going all throughout. So it may be 1,000 people, but it's one at a time, as it were, over the course of a month or something. So it all depends on, and we're often very much not in control of all of those dynamics. Like, okay, we got 50 people. All right. Then we begin to think about what kind of experience we're going to do and the depth of things that we can interact with them. One of my favorite exhibits that we did, or experiences, was around plastic pollution in the ocean. And it was at a museum, the California Academy of Art and Science. And it was for their nightlife experience, which is like a after hours party kind of thing. So we created a set of drinking vessels with relative amounts of plastic in them, and people were invited to come up and drink. Of course, they didn't, because it's disgusting. But people could interact with that, and they saw us drinking out of it. There's a little trick, because the water wasn't actually connected to the gross plastic water, so we were drinking out of it. People were disgusted. So that was kind of an ambient flow of people over a couple of hours. All of it to say, I will kind of end with this point, which I make all the time, and it's important. The experience is really just the invitation. The actual work, or the party, if you want to put it that way, is the conversations that come after it, and maybe even the real work is, does it change something? Mm-hmm. Is it a difference that makes a difference to how people think, behave, act, see the world, and make decisions? Does it change something? Hopefully, does it change something positively? That's our outcome. This is just a way to get to that. And so, we spend a lot of time in creating a scene, and it's fun, and we create the artifacts and do all that. But the payoff, the real point of this, circling all the way back to the purpose question, is really to get people to do something differently, see the world differently, act better, connect with the future more. So that's really what we're trying to do with all of this. And so as a point in this journey, Create a Scene is I think a really cool space to take a future, turn it into reality, and then hopefully reality turns back into a better future.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Jake. I could sit here and ask you 100 more questions, but I'll wrap us up. Really appreciate your time today, and look forward to diving into it more.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks, everyone.
Well, that was Victoria's conversation with Jake Dunagan. Great conversation too, plenty in there. I was particularly struck by the movement from thinking about futures to actually feeling futures.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating too. We can have these imagined futures, these scenarios, and these artifacts, and they don't just help us think about what's possible, they're actually changing and transforming how we relate to the future. Jake talked a lot about how these experiences serve as cognitive bridges. I really liked that. It makes the abstract feel tangible and real, and that's what really changes our mindset, right?
Yeah, and he also talked about rituals, and I wonder if people listening might be starting to think about how they can use rituals in their own practice to sort of make those futures even more impactful.
Yeah, he talked about using familiar rituals in a transformed future setting, which was interesting. He talked about the wedding ceremony where the vows are the same, but you're marrying a robot. So, something we know well, something that makes the future feel both familiar and different at the same time.
Yeah, or the bar mitzvah, right? The ritual itself, the rite of passage is still there, but the context and what it signifies actually could be entirely different in the future. So it's a kind of a nifty way of tying us emotionally to the future.
Right, and then he also used the example of, mundane rituals as well, brushing your teeth, the family dinner, You know, again, these everyday rituals, when they're placed in a future setting, they highlight the changes in the world. And it's not just about making the future feel real, it's about challenging our assumptions. So, Jake pointed out that these rituals help us confront the discomfort or surprise we might feel about certain futures. So, for example, if you're imagining a graduation ceremony in 2050, what does that look like? Maybe the ceremony is entirely virtual, maybe it's a communal event that's blending the digital and the physical world in a way that we can't actually imagine yet. So, these rituals ground us in a future context and really force us to think differently about how we'll live, celebrate, and connect. I think that's the key takeaway for me too. If we can shift our mindsets through imagining these rituals, we can change the way that we approach the future, making it something that we actively shape rather than just react to. If you can imagine it, you can design it.
Yeah, and I'm sure lots of people listening are looking forward to having a go at it. You get to be the first one with our next episode, which is a workshop episode using some of the thinking that we've been talking about in this interview. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the Futures Workshop Substack so you get these episodes fresh to your inbox. Keep the feedback coming, and we'll catch you next episode.
Ka kite, see you next time.